well, what is toxic masculinity? Is all masculinity toxic? Am I toxic because I'm masculine? Like, what is masculinity in itself? Is it something that is inherent to, like, those qualities exist in a man versus feminine qualities exist in a female? Is it broken?
I think that we have certain instincts and we have certain characteristics and maybe behaviors as men, and I think women have them too, right? There is a line between masculinity and toxic masculinity of masculinity is be strong, and that could and does mean physical, but also can be mental, spiritually, like all of those things, right? Yeah. But then I think that someone could read that and go, that means I have to be stronger than everybody else. And that is very toxic.
Hey man, you want to talk about God?
So
you sent me a text, and I don't know what the phrase was. Desired, need to always fix something.
Yeah, why do I need to fix everything?
Right. Like Bob the Builder.
Yeah. And unfortunately, usually when I'm in that place, I am not getting the result that I want. Because I think because in my head, I think, well, if something is wrong, that's X.
Right.
And if I can fix X with Y,
right,
then you should be happy.
Right.
like this should be over.
Right.
And overwhelmingly, I've learned that when I overuse that quality to want to fix something, it's not actually addressing the root cause of whatever the emotion is.
What got you on this thought process?
So a couple months ago,
yes,
actually, it's probably was like a year or two ago. You recommended a book, and Jason, our pastor, was doing a series of sermons and kept recommending this book, Wild at Heart, I think, by John Eldridge,
yes.
Not Aldrich.
Aldridge, no.
Is that
Eldridge?
That might be a character in a movie. But I kind of think I went to you to talk about it, kind of looking for affirmation, being like, this is kind of cheesy, right? All this stuff about all of his quotes. Right. You know the book much better than I do. And you're like, no, actually, like that's a book like I would 100% recommend that you read it, and actually that your wife reads it too.
Yes.
And you had said that Brooke had read it.
Yes.
So I read the book. And from that, I think that I've kind of been more recently going through this process of wanting to, or thinking about and wanting to talk about what masculinity is.
Yeah. Because
the reality is right now, there's a phrase that goes around a lot. We talk about it. It's called toxic masculinity.
Right.
And I think that without wanting to be like insensitive or like, I don't know, go against the flow, but like, if I'm being honest, it's actually had me thinking about like, well, what is toxic masculinity? Is all masculinity toxic? Am I toxic because I'm masculine?
Are you masculine though? I had to. I'm sorry. You set it up very well.
Yeah.
You set it up well.
But yeah, I think it's something that is like, what is masculinity in itself? If you had to define it, is it something that is inherent to like those qualities exist in a man versus feminine qualities exist in a female? And is it broken? Like, is it like, Matt, what is this phrase?
Drummer Matt, could you go on to like Google and type in Bible verses on masculinity and then read them to me, please? I'm just curious. I don't have a list in front of me.
And then the other day, I sent you an Instagram video.
Yes.
Of JP.
Yes.
As I like to call him.
Yes.
Jordan Peterson. Hello, sir.
Right.
Peach.
Right.
Peach is PJ.
Right.
JP. Jip. My man Jip.
Yeah.
And you were like, are you really sending me videos of Jordan Peterson right now. I was like, yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I know a lot about Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
Other
I
than
think he's
listening to a
got
couple.
certain things that I definitely like resound with and enjoy and agree with, and I think he's got certain things that I just don't, which is honestly most people in life. So
Sure. So he has a quote that
Yeah.
says, "The problem with masculinity today is that it's often presented as toxic,
Yep.
as though there's something wrong with being a man, but that's just not true."
I agree with that.
So you having read Wild at Heart,
Yes.
it talks a lot about like the masculine spirit.
Yes.
Like, how would you define, like, what is masculinity to you? Like, what are the characteristics of it in a healthy way?
Yeah. So, well, I think what's really interesting is in that book, right? John Eldridge, J.E. as we'll call him, right?
Gee.
He talks a lot about the way that God created men
Mhm.
and the way that God created women also. And there are going to be some people out there who hear me say that and think that it's a negative way, but it's not at all, by the way. I would highly recommend Wild at Heart. For anyone out there, especially if you have children that are boys, I think it changes a lot of what you see. But I think that with masculinity, I think when I hear that word, when I think of it, I very much so think of, I would describe it and I think this is actually where part of the problem comes in, right? I would describe it as a very natural thing of, I think that we have certain instincts and we have certain characteristics and maybe behaviors as men, and I think women have them too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that those can flow into all different ways of, it's not gender roles of like men should do this and women should do that.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what it is.
Right.
And that's not what masculine and feminine is either. But I think when I think of masculinity, I think of, and in the book, he talks about like the desire to fight for what you want, right? And he talks about this desire to kind of, as you go through, he talks about several different stages, as you go through, like this desire to provide for
Mm-hmm.
and provide security for, right? And I think that those things like that is what I attribute to masculinity, of these almost like what I would call natural instincts, natural behaviors that I think a lot of guys have.
Mm-hmm.
And I think actually the problem with, and kind of what JP is referring to in that statement is that what society puts up, what culture puts up as masculinity is like the bros who
Sure.
are 6 foot, 300 pounds of muscle and mistreat women and
Mhm.
all of those kinds of things.
Like possessive,
Right.
dominating.
Correct. And I do think that's toxic
Sure.
and not right.
Yeah. And what is, when we say something like that's toxic,
Mhm.
like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Like, what is that?
I would put that down as how you're treating other people.
Yeah.
And I think that you can be a toxic person if all you ever do is putting down the people around you. And there's like this thing on the internet, particularly as of late, with a guy named Andrew Tate, right? And this like alpha.
I thought he might come into this conversation.
Well, he did like a couple minutes in, right? Of this like alpha male thing. And I think that the problem with that is he rose to prominence on social media by putting other people down,
Mm-hmm.
by telling them they weren't man enough, or you're not doing this the way a man is supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's very opposite compared to like the book that he wrote of, this is how men were created to be. We should let them do that. Yeah, John Eldridge, like we should let them do that. And here's why.
Mm-hmm.
And how most men, or not most, a lot of men are, I'm paraphrasing here, but kind of kept in a box and not allowed to be men.
Yeah.
In what he describes in the book as the way that God created men.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, man,
If I'd known
What
this is where we're going to go, I would have refreshed on the book before
I'm
we
sorry.
recorded this.
Sorry. No, but we don't have to like linger on like wild at
Matt,
heart.
do you have Bible verses?
I do. So I Googled verses about masculinity. This is from openbible.info. These are the top 3 of 100 Bible verses about masculinity, the top 3 that were voted to the top of the list. 1 Corinthians 16:13. These are all in the ESV translation. Be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. Deuteronomy 22:5. A woman shall not wear a man's garment, nor shall a man put on a woman's cloak, for whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord your God. And 1 Timothy 5:8. But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever.
Interesting. So, first off, whenever we talk about the Bible, we should always look at context and look at times and look at all of that kind of stuff, right? But I think that like just taking out of 1 Corinthians 6, what was the first? 16:13. I heard the words "be strong" in that. Right.
That's correct.
And I think that there is a line between masculinity and toxic masculinity of masculinity is be strong. Yeah. And that could and does mean physical, but also can be mental, spiritually, like all of those things. Right. Yeah. But then I think that someone could read that and go, that means I have to be stronger than everybody else. And that is very toxic.
Yeah.
I think some good context to add here. I just Googled definition of toxic in relation to other people. A toxic person is anyone whose behavior adds negativity and upset to your life.
So it wasn't that far off.
No, I think you're right. I think that there is something about this where I guess my question goes like, is masculinity inherently toxic? Which I feel like some people I've thought about. I think a lot of people kind of go ahead and it's like, and these impulses to want to be a protector, to want to move for action, to provide, to look out for, those things in and of themselves are not, I don't believe, inherently wrong. But like anything else, like a strength, if overused, becomes a weakness.
Yes.
So if my masculinity says that like I want to own a situation because I need to like throughout, like I want to direct my tribe, my family, my group in a direction that I think is best for us and our outcome, like that is a fairly healthy impulse to have if you're a person that has that. However, if you overuse that to where you're just bossing everybody around, like nobody wants to be around that adds a spirit of negativity into the group, into the interactions, into the room, that I think then becomes what you would say is toxic.
Right. So I really think this would be a great conversation to have our wives on for and like do again, but talk about males and females and talk about it with our wives. I think that would be really interesting. But
we could just call that episode Inity.
Inity. Yes, I like it. I'm a fan.
Yeah,
I like it.
Yeah.
I think that what I would like call a lot of those things is, we kind of started with this situation of like this desire to always fix things, of where like if my wife comes to me with a problem, I want to fix it. And some, like if you've ever heard anything relationship anywhere, right? That situation could work, but my wife could also be coming to me just looking for somebody to talk to and listen, right? Yeah. And I think that we could dive very deep into that, and I think we should, but I think it also comes down to this like level of control of everything around you too. I think that can be very toxic of and I would put that in a place of like, I'm going to use these gifts that honestly God has given me of strength and of providing for and of all of these things to go over the top and start trying to control and fix things that are completely out of my control and outside of my like little circle of ability. And when I start doing that, I become toxic to people around me.
Yeah. I even wonder if the word toxic is really helpful in most situations. Like toxic masculinity does exist for sure. But for most people, is it so much that it's toxic or that I just have in this situation a warped sense of my masculinity?
I think
So
that
is
it's just a word. I think that's like a culture society thing.
sure, but words matter,
Oh, absolutely.
and like a word like toxic is supercharged.
Right.
Where it's like that. If I say toxic masculinity, I could say all masculinity is poisonous.
Mm-hmm.
But if I could say like, hey, have a conversation one-on-one with somebody, walk them through a situation where it's like, in here, you're using a trait that was given to you by God,
Right.
that is masculine, and it's being overused, or that your sense of this is being a little bit warped right now to where it's having a negative impact.
Yeah. What? Okay. So like, I feel like you keep using this term of like my masculinity. Like you keep using this, right? Let's just get real for a second, right? Of like my masculinity. And we kind of even started that of like, I read this book and I hear toxic masculinity, and like, does that mean my masculinity is toxic, or am I doing the wrong things, right? So like when you say my masculinity, like what do you actually mean? What are you talking
I'm
about?
talking about whatever impulse or natural giving is, I feel like for me is like innately there. So this is just my natural way of responding, which I would say is masculine as a male. So I am not trying to speak for everybody's sense of masculinity, but I'm speaking specifically toward me.
Yeah. Well, I think what is really interesting is I think that, you know, God created us with specific talents, specific abilities, specific things that we have that he's given us, right? And I think that a lot of times what culture, and so I keep going back to this like culture society thing, because I think it's a really big deal in this conversation of, I feel like any kind of like pressure or any kind of behaviors that are expected of men are put on men, not from God or not from us, but from everyone else around us. And that's where it becomes very difficult.
Yeah. And you know where you start, I think, when you start saying things like mine or questioning things, ultimately it all comes from a point of insecurity.
Yes, it does.
And masculinity used in a negative way for anyone that is abusing it and being like this toxic thing, like ultimately it probably all comes from a point of deep insecurity in their heart. So they feel like they're overcompensating. It's like the Napoleon complex. Little guy always has to have the scrappy attitude and want to pick a fight with everybody.
Kind of like you.
Sure. But it's like that all comes from an insecurity of like, well, what does everybody else in the room? They're all looking at me. How do I size myself up against everybody else in the room?
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's a truer statement than that. When I'm not in a healthy place and I walk into a room with other people, specifically men or whatever, or a group of guys, and you find yourself sizing yourself up,
right?
Like, why?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
It's the why is because I'm insecure.
Yes, it is. And
in that moment, or like, and I'm walking and you find yourself saying things you wouldn't usually say.
Right.
You start talking in a tone or a dialect, or like, I know people specifically, like their accents change. Like they pick up a dialect, like they're in Western New York, if even just because they're in the room with somebody that's from Western New York.
Right. I think that what's really interesting too is I think that there are certain things that, like, there are certain things. Okay, so let's talk about emotions for a second. Okay. So here's what's crazy is that, like with me growing up and being raised and going through childhood, teenager, all these kinds of things, I do what a lot of specifically men do, of where I compartmentalize and I tuck things deep down and I don't display a lot of emotions. I'm not a very emotional person. And I've also developed this thing, which actually I do think is true, is that emotions are very, very, very dangerous. And when you're emotional, like I have this thought process, right? That when you're emotional, you make irrational decisions that are short-term based. They aren't taking a larger scope entails, right? And so I take that sentence, that reasoning that sounds very like it makes sense, to like this extreme of that means I can't show any emotions at all.
Right.
And I can't cry, and I can't
Right.
I can't show any of that, right? And that has been a very and like it what I don't know where it came from. Like, you know, I think my dad is that way, but I think a lot of men are that way. And I don't exactly know why. And I think there are cultural and societal things of, if you cry, you're not a man. You're a child. You're showing a feminine thing, right? Or I remember, you know, playing baseball and like keeping playing through games when I probably shouldn't have, because I couldn't show that I was in pain, right? Or I didn't want to show that I was in pain.
Yeah.
And I think that all of that comes back to a very interesting point now, because I have 2 boys as kids, and I have to try very, very consciously to explain to them that the way that I treat my emotions, I don't actually think is right. And I think that they will grow up to be better men if they are like, in tune is a weird word, but like in tune with their emotions and not just hiding all of their emotions away.
And I think that there's something that if we actually zoomed out and looked evolutionarily, like through history, the last couple thousand years, like the world was, no matter what you think, like it was a much more violent place, more common. It was more common for violence. And it has progressively, thank God, like gotten less in certain areas, some, you know, not across the board. And so I think like evolutionarily, is that the word I'm looking for?
Historically?
Yeah. But like it is in, I think for males throughout history in our genes, it's like, it is a very hard world.
Yes.
It is a violent world.
Yes.
And ideally, like we progress through generations, and the world turning less like violent is a relatively new thing. Maybe 100 years.
Yes. Depending on where you're at in the world.
Depending on where you're at, but at large.
Yes.
Like we have like, and so I always look at like with the context of even like, you know, looking at my father and how I was raised. And then if I zoom out and look at it, it's like, well, what was his situation? How was masculinity displayed to my father? And the answer to that is my dad didn't have a relationship with his father growing up and had a stepfather figure that 100% was abusive and did things that, like, in my experience, like he's never done those things to me. So like, however, I could look at like physical punishment was part of my life growing up. But like, if I looked at the progression, it's like, man, like if my dad received this level of abuse, and I hope he's okay with me sharing that, but I would say like he was a better father than whatever, he showed me a better form of masculinity than what was shown to him. And my goal would be to show my child a better form or a healthier form of masculinity that was shown. So it's not about being perfect or right or wrong. No. It's about like acknowledging I don't want to put any blame on past generations because the world has changed and it's better. I wish people treated women the same way they do today in 1919. Right. But that's not reality, and that's not the world we live in, and we can't like deny the fact that happened. Right. But if we say that there hasn't been any progression, like that's also not true either. Right.
And I think that like when you start looking at that like historically and contextually and how things have changed in the world over thousands of years, I think it's also really interesting because I had this thought of like, 2,000 years ago, I mean, biblical times, like wars, people fighting, people overtaking everything, right? I mean, the Jewish people were overtaken like 17 times. Like they were conquered like a million times just in the Bible, right? Yeah. And it was the men who were fighting. And then there comes into play of like, we're talking about this emotion, like I was talking about emotions, right? Of how if you are on a battlefield and you're fighting somebody. Yeah. And you don't show pain and you're hurt, but you don't show that to anybody. There's a lot of mental like games that are being played with whoever your opponent is, right? And the
Yeah.
same thing on the basketball court,
Sure.
the same thing like now here today in sports or whatever it is of like you're frustrated, you're upset, you're physically hurt. If you don't show that,
Stay composed. Yeah.
it
Yeah.
gives you a legs up. Like it helps you. You know what I mean? And it's crazy of how, you look at even like, I mean, this is like a weird out of left park, but you look at like, have you ever done any research or read like on Sparta, like the Spartans and how
Besides 300,
right. I mean,
because I've seen the front kick.
right. Yeah. Yes, exactly. But like how they raised boys
Yeah.
very specifically.
Yeah.
And the Spartans were also cool because of their beliefs in women. And they thought that women were the strongest because they gave birth to Spartan men, which is like really cool thing. But how they very specifically raised them and throughout history of if you didn't show anything, you were stronger. And now it comes into play of like, now in like a daily life. And is that really needed or healthy?
Yeah. There's a line, I think, because there are moments where, I mean, I think even professionally and stuff, like we're in a spot like where it's like, it is the right thing for me to do to compose my emotions and not, especially if you're a leader in a certain sense, to exhibit a behavior that is not emotionally driven, to remove emotions from the conversation and be able to come back down to, because like you said, emotions can be dangerous. Emotions are charged. And when most of the things you say that you regret, you were probably emotional when you said them.
Right.
So it doesn't, and I mean, you can say beautiful things off of emotion as well, but yeah, I think it's about control. And so is that needed today? In some ways, yes, not to the same capacity or the level that I think you're referring to.
Right. I think like, and how do we take all of this back to the desire and need to fix things? How does it all play into each other?
I don't know. If I'm being honest, I want to go back to something you said. I'm sorry.
Let's go
Can
back.
we go back?
Let's go back.
You talked about growing up and like the experience of you having boys now, and recognizing the fact that now you are the model of, or one of the biggest models in your boy's life of what masculine behavior is like, and thinking about, so like, what are the things consciously that you are trying to make sure you show them that a man can and should do in a healthy way?
It's a loaded question. I think one thing I'm going through with my 3-year-old right now is through like talking to him, but also in times where like discipline is needed. I think it's trying to teach him and explain to him that like whining and screaming and crying because you're not getting what you want is not okay. But if you are hurt, then crying is okay. And I very, very consciously he has taken things of where like he's done something and I've taken him to timeout. I'm like, buddy, do you know why you're in timeout? And he will go, because I was crying. And I go, no.
Yeah.
That's not why you're in timeout.
Yeah.
And then like I have to I sit there and have a conversation with him, because I don't ever want that to be his mindset and be like a, especially as he's turning from like a toddler into like a child. And developmentally, the things that he's establishing and learning right now are going to carry him for years and years and years and years. And so if he comes to this conclusion through my actions or what I say or what my wife says or my wife's actions of where crying is negative, then I'm not even doing it from like, oh, you need to be a man standpoint. Like I'm just teaching him something that I think could in the future turn into something that could be very toxic.
Yeah.
And then there's like also this line of like I don't want him to be like a crybaby and cry all the time. Like that would be weird if you cry because you like spill something on the floor.
Yeah.
But like if something is wrong, it's okay.
Yeah. I remember growing up and having moments of looking like, because there's a certain point whenever you're like a child and like you experience pain, like you just cry.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's just what you do.
Mm-hmm.
And I do remember being around like my dad or my dad's friends and seeing like I think with the one time like my dad like sprained or broke his ankle playing basketball
Mm-hmm.
and like didn't cry.
Job.
So I remember vividly like being a child, because I'll just say this again too, like when you're a kid, something happens that you experience pain, and the natural response is to cry. You have tears, you just cry.
Mm-hmm.
I remember being like hit with a ball and like literally and still being like just like crying because it friggin' hurt in my funny bone.
Right. You did that last week. That's still something that you do.
Cry when I get hurt.
When someone hits you with a ball.
Oh, okay.
And it's okay.
Okay, thanks. But I remember watching my dad or his friends and like playing sports or doing whatever, but like I think my dad broke his ankle or sprained his ankle and playing basketball. And I was like, oh my gosh, how is he not crying?
Mm-hmm.
I would be screaming right now. I'd be bawling my eyes out.
Mm-hmm.
And then consciously would think, I was like, I wonder if I'll get to the point someday, like when I grow up, I won't cry
Mm-hmm.
when it hurts. And like, when the heck does that happen?
Yeah.
But eventually, like without even thinking about it, like you can go through, experience some pretty crappy pain, like stub your toe or something that's really ridiculously, like it hurts. And you sit there and you just like close your, you're like, oh, I just want to swear and like scream. But it's like, you're not going to cry.
Right. Right.
Like when does that switch happen?
Right. And I think what's really interesting is as parents, it's super, super, super important because I was reading this thing the other day about love languages and how they apply to children and how children also have their own love languages.
Oh, no. Do they?
Yeah, they do. And so, well, they have like the same love languages, but children have those too. Like it's not just an adult thing in a marriage or how we normally use it. But it's talking about how there was this example given of where like a young girl had gotten in trouble and her mom had yelled at her and then slammed the door and then went out.
Mm-hmm.
And years later, this was like a defining moment for this girl as like a teenager of things changed here. And her mom didn't even know or remember what she was talking about. And so it's crazy as parents how just like the smallest things can come into play of where your dad probably doesn't remember that moment of like, like I was playing on basketball court. I got hurt.
Yeah.
Like it is what it is. But you saw that.
Yeah.
And you went, whoa, like, is this what I'm supposed to do? Is this how I'm supposed to be, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, I think it is very different for me having boys because part of that is I see things where I wish my masculinity was different in certain ways. And so what I work on changing and what I want to work on changing, I'm trying to teach my boys. But with you having a girl, how does that change? How does that impact, I guess, what you show and how you show it? Yeah.
I'm definitely not perfect at it, but my heart and my goal is to model for my daughter at 21 months old healthy traits of masculinity. My goal is to, and so some of that is being the person that whenever she falls or hurts herself, that like is comforting if she is crying, but like it's not like responding in anger.
Right.
And this is not even just to her. Like I have to be very conscious to make sure that I am not responding in unhealthy ways to my wife. And if I'm being really honest, when I do, I feel so crappy. Not even just to my wife, but when I display unhealthy forms. It happened today.
Okay.
Got up this morning, spent the morning with Rue. Abby comes up. I was about to jump on a call, and she's like, I'll take Ruby downstairs so you can do your call. And I was like, cool. And as she's doing it, I'm like, I'm going to do a nice thing. I'm going to say it like, do you want me to make you some coffee?
Right.
Abby, she's like, it's okay. And I was like, I'm going to make some coffee for her either way. She's going to appreciate this.
Yeah.
And on our little like coffee counter stand thing, there was a glass bottle of Topo Chico that needed to be thrown away.
Right.
I did not put
like
the
the
Topo
sparkling
Chico,
water.
like the sparkling water,
Okay.
the nice stuff, the good stuff.
Yeah.
But it's a tall, skinny bottle. Okay. And as I am going to get the coffee beans, put them in the grinder, go through it, like my elbow brushes the slender Topo Chico bottle and knocks it to the ground. Makes a loud noise to it. And I don't know why. I do know why, if I'm being honest. I saw it there before, and I was like, that's a silly place to put that. Why wouldn't you just put it in the recycling?
Mm-hmm.
So I knock the Topo Chico over,
Mm-hmm.
and then immediately I'm annoyed with myself because it makes a loud noise, and it's like,
Right.
at 7:30 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And then my response is like this frustration because I was like, I knew it wasn't supposed to be there. And I literally, oh my God. I literally am like, close the door to the basement loud enough that you'd be like, what the
Right.
heck is that? Open the garage door, throw it
Right.
out into the recycling, and close the door again. And I'm like,
Yes.
I'm like, open the door. I was like, sorry, that's my fault. But I had this like weird little outburst of
Right.
like, I'm frustrated with this stupid situation, this mistake, and this was not my fault. And I'm like, I'm just
Right.
like, and like be louder than I need to be
Yes.
as like an unhealthy form to show like, you're going to know I'm mad when I'm mad
Right.
because I'm a man.
Yes.
Like, what the heck was that?
Yes.
So not perfect at it. And then I always like, everything time I do something stupid like that, no matter how small,
Mm-hmm.
because Abby will just be like, what, you idiot.
Right.
But like my daughter sees that
Right.
every time.
Right.
And so like those moments, it's really the moments when I display frustration, aggression, I lose composure over something that is so tiny
Right.
that I feel most gut checked. And the fact that it's like, I am providing an example of everything that I don't like about other men that
Yeah.
act like little babies when they're just frustrated. They want to like
Yeah.
hit a wall. Like the idea of
Right.
hitting a wall has always been so stupid to me.
I used to do that when I was a teenager.
People are like, I punched a hole through a wall.
Yeah.
Punch
I've
like,
done that
it's
before.
like, what the hell's wrong with you?
Just
Like you just have to clean it. Like punch
True.
a pillow, like whatever. I don't know. But everybody has their own like
Right.
their thing because that's not my natural
Right.
impulse. Like I'm like that's silly to do.
Right.
But other people might not throw a bottle into recycling
Right.
like fervently.
Did it break when you?
No,
threw
it sunk it
sunk it
right
Got it.
into
Got it,
right
got it,
into
got
the
it,
blue
got it.
bin.
I think that's really, really interesting. Of like how you want to show that masculinity
Yeah.
to your daughter. Are you gonna do the thing where like when she's a teenager, like take her on dates and show her how a man's
don't know.
supposed to treat her?
I ideally will show her that outside of like the special occasion. I don't know that I would be. You never know until you're in those
Yeah.
situations. But like me now, like I don't know that. Like I would love to take her out and just be like, babe, do you want to go get some dinner? Like,
Right.
and like, but I don't know. If I would be like, this is a daddy-daughter date kind of
Right,
thing.
right,
But it doesn't matter if that works for you. That works for you.
right.
But I also try to show her things where I try to make it a point where it's like I dance with her every day.
I love that.
And like literally like full up like on the floor. And now it's the point where it's like I can't like she won't accept me sitting down. She's like if we don't talk about Bruno
Right.
from Encanto comes on,
Yeah.
she come right over, grab my finger. She's like hop, hop,
Yep.
hop, and she drags me to the middle of the floor. We have plenty of space,
Yes.
and she just
You
starts
have to dance.
and she literally goes like this.
Right.
She's learned her no.
Yes.
And then I just literally will be like, I am going to dance
right.
like nobody's watching.
Right.
Like just have joy and like sure, and she smiles and she laughs and she's like chasseing or like
Right.
bouncing around everywhere, and like that is like I want to show her that like that's okay for a man to do as well.
Right.
Like to express joy in that way, like
Right.
to not be insecure.
See,
of
you
like
wanna-
who's always watching.
You want to know where the real test comes in, and I'm gonna put you through this.
Okay.
Is next time that we're in a group with all of our kids,
Yeah.
and if I play, we don't talk about Bruno very loudly
Yeah.
in front of a group of people, then will Ruby still do that, and will you still dance with her?
I mean, if she asked me to dance with her, I would dance with her at any time.
Right.
Yeah. There's a weird thing too that comes up with I think when you're with your kid that like
Oh, right.
your insecurities of like how are people looking at it, it's like none
Yes,
of that
it gives
crap
you permission
matters.
to do whatever you want.
I'm just looking at you
Yeah.
and being like, I'm going to enjoy this
Yeah.
moment with you, which is also a thing. So is masculinity, especially the toxic kind,
Mhm.
is it just layers and layers and layers of stuff that we keep putting on ourselves that we think everybody else expects from us? Every other guy in the room expects it. So we all have the same kind of like, it's like peacocking. Like we just walk up and it's like, people are like, you're doing just like, roll your shoulders back,
Right.
chest out, kind of go through. It's just a child has an amazing way of just peeling all
Yeah.
of that crap away. It's like I really don't care
Yeah.
what this acquaintance of mine that's in the
Right.
room thinks if I'm doing a silly dance with my daughter.
Right.
That couldn't be further from my mind.
Right. I think it's really interesting too, because you're talking about this, and I think I do not the opposite. I do like the inverted thing of where I am very not cautious, but I do try very hard to make sure that I treat my wife Brooke
Mm-hmm.
in all of the right ways when my kids are there. I don't ever want, like, I don't want to raise my voice, which I don't do very often to her anyway.
Sure.
But like, I want to treat her well too.
Yeah.
All the
I mean,
time, but,
ideally,
like-
yeah, all the time.
Like, it's this thing of like, it's with children. I think it's this interesting thing of where like, striving to be this example and like putting pressure on yourself to set that example, regardless of what's going on, and then what does that cover up or like? I don't know.
And I think ultimately you just have to work on yourself at all times.
Right.
You have to be comfortable with yourself. You have to work on your insecurities at all times. The byproduct of that is that you will model that behavior for your kids. The byproduct of that is you will model that behavior in your marriage, which will then show it to your kids.
Right.
So because kids are smart, like I knew it
So
growing
smart.
up. You see, when things were really okay and healthy in our home, and when things were not.
Yeah.
You can see whenever we are like people. Sometimes you go like you see it every Sunday. People put on their Sunday face with their kids, and they walk in. And everybody's like, "Hey, we all look good. We rolled up in our car. We're hanging out." And then you know that like there are situations gone at home. Is like that's not the actual reality.
Right.
That's just a show.
Right. Okay. Wait. So now we've gotten to like working on yourself and all of those things when it comes to masculinity and that kind of thing, right? And so can we go to like a very practical way of like how do we, like you and I, speaking very specifically about us, how do we, practically speaking, not like be masculine, but in a healthy way and not in a toxic way? And what exactly does that look like in our views and like your view and opinion? Like we're talking about setting examples for kids and all these kinds of things, but ourselves.
Yeah. So how do we actually be anything genuinely at our core? Really, I believe is like what's in your heart. So we have to and out of the abundance of your heart is what you speak, and what you speak is what you do. So I think we have to come to grips with the ability and allow ourselves to be vulnerable, to be transparent, and actually talk about the things that are messing us up.
And I think a lot of times the world would call that not masculine at all.
Right.
Like being vulnerable,
Right.
showing weakness.
Yeah. But that's the thing, like that's where it's toxic, right? We always talk about this like the pendulum, right? Of it's black, it's white, it's male, it's female, masculine, feminine.
Right.
But reality is like, I mean, is that there is some gray in there.
Yeah.
And we are not designed, I don't believe, to be all full throttle in this way and the other group this way. Extremes in anything, I truly believe this, will kill you. Extremism on the right to the left doesn't matter. It's a problem.
Yes.
Like what we need is empathy, understanding, and the ability to listen. And so every time we're on that extreme, like you're toxic either way. You can be feminine and be toxic as well.
Right.
It's really just saying like, don't be toxic.
Right.
Like work on not being toxic.
Right.
I don't know if that answers your question. I'm sorry. But like,
no, it does. So I have a follow-up question for you.
Okay.
And this is a really weird question. Jesus in the Bible, how he acted, how he treated people, is that the standard for masculinity?
I would imagine he's the standard for, he lived the perfect life, right? Sinless, blameless to the Father, like fulfilled the law.
Right.
So if you're looking at the story and the person of Jesus in the context of like, we're saying that Jesus represents perfection, then how could you not say that he represents the perfect form of masculinity? And look at his behaviors then too. Jesus does not exhibit a ton of the behaviors often that we would typically like equate to an alpha male.
Well, he threw the tables once.
He threw the tables once. He made a whip.
He did it.
Whipped him.
He did it, dude.
Yeah.
No.
But look at all the other times too. Like he wept
Right.
when Lazarus died.
Right. Now I'm thinking. I'm thinking here
Mm-hmm.
of like, at any
Oh, dude.
point, what have I separated away? Of where like I know that Jesus is this perfect example,
Mhm.
right? And have I like compartmentalized things there of like I want to strive to be like Jesus,
Mhm.
but I'm not looking at Jesus for what masculinity looks like, or
Mhm.
for what this looks like, or for what that looks like,
Yeah.
of this like weird thing. Because the answer, like I would say, the answer to that question is yes, also. But like you said, he cries, he showed emotions, he showed
Yeah.
pain. He's on the cross, like all of these things that I feel like if I went out and asked, you know, if I did one of the whole, you take a microphone out on the street and you ask 100 people,
Mm-hmm.
are men supposed to cry? And
Yeah.
it would be like, no.
99 of them are like, why? No.
Right.
Yeah. But he wept for because his friend had died.
Right.
It's a natural response. It's okay to show that emotion. He also is capable of showing extreme boldness. You think about standing up for what's true, how he faced Pontius.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's about to be sent
Right.
to like his death.
Right.
And the way his response to there is not out of anger, is not
Right.
defensive.
Right. I'm thinking
It's-
of like hear me out on this.
Oh, I got one too. Go ahead.
Okay, you keep yours.
I'll hold it.
Okay.
No, actually, I'm not going to hold it. I'm going to be present in this moment with you. And if it's still there afterwards, then we're supposed to talk about it. If not, I'm going on. So
I
please.
love that for you. I feel like the toxic masculine, this alpha male idea, is gain everything for me.
Oh, so selfish, right?
Very selfish.
Self-centered,
Right.
narcissistic.
Correct.
Just I'm the
Arrogance,
center of the
like,
world, baby.
Yes, absolutely. It's like that's what it is.
Yeah.
Right? Sacrifice of Jesus.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
so different.
Yeah.
And how does that like
Man, think about going into a gym
yes.
where you would say you see a lot of this idea of like people that are like, especially like people like a gym where they got some like the dudes that are just massive, ripped, shredded. Like these are like, in some ways, society would say like this is the epitome of the masculine form,
Yeah.
right? What if you are a crippled, hobbled, can't walk kind of person? You drag yourself into this gym.
Mm-hmm.
What's the response 99% of those gym rats, the big dudes in the gym, are going to give to that person? If you're not, if you don't look acceptable,
Okay, so I can't talk about being a crippled, hobbled person going to a gym,
right? This is even better.
right? But I will talk as being a fat person going
Yes.
to a gym, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like the biggest dudes in the gym, to me personally, maybe I hope this is the same way
Yeah.
you've seen, the biggest dudes in the gym have always been the nicest.
Yeah,
The biggest dudes.
yeah,
The like people who are fit and working out are not.
yeah. I get you. I get where you're going.
Like
yeah.
there's an extreme.
Yeah, because they're confident. They're not insecure.
Correct.
They're
They're
not-
not.
they're not-
Exactly.
It's the weekend savages, the weekend warriors that are like the real
the
problems.
people who do, I mean, they come
Yeah.
and work out and they're fit and they're great and they're like, bruh, I'm using this squat rack. Like, get out my face.
Yeah.
But I guarantee you,
Yes.
like if I went
Yes.
like so Gold's Gym, right? I feel like it's known as like this bodybuilder, like
Yeah.
the big dudes are in there, right? I would honestly like if I was self-conscious about going into a gym and
Yeah.
working out as a fat guy, which I'm working on, but as a fat guy, I would honestly almost feel more comfortable going into Gold's Gym.
Correct, because you
Of
could be
not being like judged or looked down
right.
on than
'Cause
going into like
a lot of powerlifters are very big,
right,
like not shredded.
right, but like going into Planet Fitness where everybody's like this and
Yeah.
super fit and awesome.
Yeah,
It's good for them, but
yeah. But I think that I think you focused the story in a little bit. But I was thinking about like the way Jesus responded to crippled people or people that were deformed or
Yes.
not up to a perfect physical state, not healthy.
yes, lepers.
That would be like that's a healthy form of masculinity then,
yes,
compared to the semi-fit
mm-hmm.
28-year-old
Mm-hmm.
at LA Fitness
right,
that's a d-bag.
right. Like if you go into the gym, but like I feel like with this example, like I've experienced like even a very specific example of like if I go into the gym and I'm doing bench press or something,
Mm-hmm.
right? Then it's very rare for someone who is not pretty big to like offer a spot, but they're there and they'll do it.
You think I'm gonna spot you? How much weight are you putting up?
Bench press?
Yeah, how much weight you got?
Like a max is probably 2 plates, 90, 135. What is that? No.
Yeah.
That's 1 plate on each side.
Yeah, so you would.
Like max is like 2 plates, 90.
I mean, you got to be a pretty big guy to spot somebody doing that, though. You don't want
Yeah.
a little guy spotting you if you're throwing up 230.
Right. No. I hear
You're
you on
gonna
that.
you're gonna die the bar.
No, I hear you on that, but I'm just saying I think that there is that line of like security versus like not like insecure
Mm-hmm.
and not worrying about that. Like I'm just gonna do me. And I'm thinking even to like videos. Have you seen there's like a TikTok or like an Instagram reel of where this like really big guy who's working out in the gym wearing a hoodie, and then he takes off his hoodie, his like pump cover, you know what I mean? And then like the gym goes quiet because it was like, oh wow. But like
He's taking steroids.
probably, most likely, absolutely, Liver King, shout out. You know what I mean? No, but
The 7 tenets.
I'm just thinking now I'm thinking of all these things with
Yeah.
Jesus and how he treated and
Yeah.
like that being the standard of how different it is than what the world says.
Right. And I think that what you kind of touched on, I think actually is a powerful takeaway, is it's easy to look at the person of Jesus, the story we're told in the Gospels, and say, like, what would Jesus do towards the big things of, like, forgiveness?
Mm-hmm.
But, like, if we actually looked at, like, what would Jesus do as a man
Mm-hmm.
in this situation? How would he treat, like, or when it comes to my masculinity?
Mm-hmm.
Or how would, like, I don't know that I often drill down that far and think of those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, in the everyday life, like I'm going through, walking into, like, what if I had the filter even going into the Trader Joe's of being like, I'm walking in here with the Spirit of Jesus, I'm going to act like Jesus in the situation.
Right.
Like, what would my interactions look like?
You would
Would
go to the nice person holding the big question mark sign and be like, would you like some time off your feet? Let me have that. Let me help people. That's what Jesus would do in my head. It's like my Jesus wear a tuxedo t-shirt.
My Jesus
You know,
has a
he likes to be
mullet.
formal, but he likes to party.
Party in the back.
And I like to party.
Yeah.
I like my Jesus to party.
Yeah. So, like, you tried to bring it back to the fix it thing.
Kind of.
I kind of was like, I want to keep going on the being a parent.
It was a better
modeling.
way to go, honestly.
But I do think that I
Is
need to
it-
address the question.
Is it toxic to want to be able to always fix something? Like if my mindset is if there's an
Yes.
issue, if there's a problem, and I always want to fix it, is that toxic?
In the sense that it can provide negativity to the room, right? Is that what the toxic definition? Something around that, right? Because anytime I go into a situation and I'm like, I always want to do this thing because it's my thing.
Yeah.
That's to me, that's not caring. That's not considerate. That's
But
not
if I always want to fix it to help people,
right.
then is it toxic?
Yes, it can be.
Well, anything can be.
Yeah.
Milk can be toxic if you let it sit.
If
there.
it's not because it can be negative because sometimes people aren't looking for that.
Yes. Okay.
So that's
Fair.
why. So that it can bring negative
Fair.
whenever I come in. So this was like the biggest thing in the first year of my marriage
Mm.
of trying to learn was that every little thing that popped up, every negative emotion that my wife felt, and she had just moved from Tennessee. So like every time she felt a little sad or anything, it's like, I got to find a way to fix this emotion she's feeling.
Yeah.
And is it always bad? Because like when something goes wrong, like I'm trying to think of a situation. I'm not the handiest guy in the world.
Yep.
This is a fact. So like, but like when things go wrong in the physical world, sometimes like our wives, like Abby wants me just to fix it.
Yep.
Just do it.
Yep.
Whether that's called AAA or not, like I'm handling that.
Right.
But there are situations when she is feeling homesick,
100%.
when she misses her brothers,
Yeah.
or not even misses, but like she can be emotional about the way somebody has treated her.
Right.
Where if I jump in and try to fix it right away,
Right.
she's like, you're not letting me be in this moment. You're not letting me feel this. And it only took, from being very honest, it was it was really the experience of a miscarriage that brought me down, I think, to my core and to the realization of there is absolutely nothing I can do to fix this situation. And having to, like, the biggest help that I could do, like, give to my wife and to me, honestly.
Yeah.
And I remember this vividly. We had gone on a trip just to try to get away for a couple of days with my brother and my sister-in-law. And driving back, I just felt this wave of emotion and grief. And I'm like blabbering, crying. And I'm like apologizing, being like, I can't hold it. Like, I don't know why. Like, I'm sorry. And then talking through that, like, breathe, get through it. And then processing with my wife that I was like, I don't think I can try to stop these emotions anymore.
Yeah.
Like, we agreed that it's like, we are going to, when these hurt, grieving emotions come up,
Right.
we have to acknowledge that they're there. It's not wrong to feel this way.
Right.
We're going to breathe and experience this emotion, experience this feeling, experience this hurt.
Right.
And then when we calm down, we're going to move on to the next thing in our day.
Right.
It's not moving on like everything is fixed.
Right.
But I think if you're unwilling to even experience that hurt and like experience, like, show a lack of control of your emotions, that you keep, like you talked about, where you swallow it. You keep going deeper and deeper, deeper. And then something happens that's probably way less. Right. And then that emotion comes out in an extremely negative way and is manifested. And that emotion was never intended to be you flipping out at a guy at a gas station.
Right.
But it's because you took it, bottled it, never processed it. And that thing is still, that fire is still living inside you.
Yes.
And then it just shot out in anger instead of processed in grief and in honest kind of like suffering, I guess. I don't know. Or I don't know what the word is there.
So, what if, okay, in a healthy way, right? What if you still are fixing everything and that's how you looked at it? In a healthy way. Okay, hear me out. Of sitting there and feeling those feelings.
Right.
And being a part of it. That is fixing it. Like,
it's just not in the way that it feels comfortable to me.
It doesn't just like fixing it doesn't just necessarily mean you have to make it exactly right.
Good. Yeah.
Or you have to make it the way that it was before.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Or on your terms.
Correct.
Or using one of your strengths. Like, why? It doesn't have to be my strength to fix it.
Correct. Whereas fixing it can be, okay, let's evaluate the situation. Let's evaluate the people involved. And what is actually going to help people grow or heal or feel love or like whatever is needed in that situation, of where sometimes it could be you need to go change the batteries in a fire alarm, right? That's like, that's fixing something, right?
Yeah.
But
I can do that one.
Can you?
Oh yeah, with a ladder or a step stool.
Okay.
Step stool.
All right, fair enough. But I think that like what that situation that you're talking about of terrible situation, going through a miscarriage, dealing with these things, like fixing it in that moment was just being with each other.
Right.
And feeling that and showing each other love in the only way that you can, of loving on each other. Like, that is fixing it. That's just not what the world would define fixing as, or even what we would naturally define fixing as, because it doesn't solve the issue, but it's dealing with it in the same way.
Yeah. So as you were saying that, I was thinking in my mind of the song "Wait on the Lord" by Maverick City, when Channy Chan said, he's like kind of exhorting, and he's like, it's not by power nor by might, but by the Spirit of the Lord, I say. And then later in that verse, he's talking about, "O mighty mountain, be moved." And I think that if my value is tied to my ability to fix things, and my ability to fix things is inevitably connected to by my physical power or my physical might, then I will ultimately be led to frustration,
Right.
because my power and might will only take me so far.
Right.
But man, maybe the unlock to healthy masculinity and the ability to channel like your ability to fix things
Right.
is to actually say like, I will bring a spirit of resolution and solutions, but I'm not relying on my power and my might or my mind
That's
or
really
my
good.
idea, because that's like, it's not my ego, but it is through the Spirit of the Lord. And that, like, what a powerful way to lead your family through situations, your friend group through situations, to whenever challenge or opposition hits you, instead of thinking our immediate reaction is like, what do I physically
What
need
do I
to
need
do?
to do? Yeah.
But if I said like, I'm going to wait on the Lord and wait and like get wisdom and move through the Spirit, and like he will provide the wisdom, he will provide the solution, he will provide the direction, the next course of action that we need to take.
Isn't the bridge of that song, they go through like, this is what happens when we wait?
That's
Or when
what
you
happens
wait?
when you wait. Yeah. And so waiting is like so opposite of what we think, I think
Yes.
culturally, as masculine is take action.
Yes.
And action means immediate.
Yes.
It means moving now.
Yes.
It says oh man. But no, like what if we just like, if we were slow, the scripture proverb says, be slow to speak, quick to listen, slow to anger.
Yes.
That is also what masculinity is supposed to be defined like.
Right.
And then if I'm being honest, like the Topo Chico thing,
Right.
not slow to anger.
Right.
I was quick.
Right.
Like-
those are like
But-
emotions though that like do come in that are like hard to have an outlet for, because like it's frustration.
But
it's like
it's not healthy. Like it's like that's the same way of you saying like it's not cool for your 3-year-old to just grow up whining.
right.
Like it's not cool to have little outbursts over stuff like that.
Right.
What's up doing? There's
Right.
nothing there. And like we can't give ourselves. I don't want to give myself the outer. She's gonna be like, it's just
Yeah.
like it's that like that's immature. Like it's
Yeah.
okay to call it that.
I think what's really interesting though, and like this is like weird to talk about, is I think that everything we've been saying, like I agree with wholeheartedly, and I love this idea of waiting, and I love this idea of like, I'm gonna fix something, but how about I don't sit here and I try to physically, me in hand, fix it. How about I go get some help
Yes.
on how to fix said situation in whatever way it needs to be, right? I love all of these things, and all of these things that we've been going through and talking about, of ranging from like fixing everything to toxic masculinity to emotions to all of this. And I'm very, very interested to go back and listen to this recording,
Yeah.
to go back and listen to this episode,
Yeah.
because I'm very interested with like, not necessarily the flow, because I feel like we flowed pretty well, but like the direction of the path of how we've gotten to where we've gotten. Because I think that, just to be clear, while I think we've talked a lot about the and this is really interesting, going back to the very beginning of the conversation, I think we've talked a lot about the toxic traits of masculinity that make people question it, and also make you not like masculine people, alpha males, all this kind of stuff that's all over the internet, right? But what we actually have not spent a lot of time talking about is other positive sides of masculinity. We've kind of been doing it, of like going back and forth of like, this could be toxic, this isn't, kind of thing, right? But there are also a lot of very positive sides to masculinity that, as you continue to dive deeper into them, I think what's really interesting is you would arrive at the same place that we've arrived here, right? And
Yeah.
that's why I'm so interested to listen to it, because
Yeah.
it's been like this
We didn't-
path.
Yeah, we didn't. I don't feel like we needed like to list. These are the 5 traits of negative
Right. No,
masculinity,
absolutely.
and then these are the 5 traits what it looks like to be positive.
Right.
But I feel like, and being totally honest, like 20 minutes into this, I was like, I don't even know if we should keep going with this conversation. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know if this is gonna land. I feel like we like get it, and now I'm walking away being like, oh, like it's so cool how that happens. But I'm like that, like I feel like I've had a valuable conversation with you now.
Absolutely.
And then we got to the point like where it's like, oh yeah, like I can walk away from this now knowing like some, not all, but some healthy traits of masculinity. And being a man or being masculine or being a female and having masculine traits either, because we know some women in our lives that have some masculine qualities and they are bosses,
Right.
and that's positive too.
Right.
It's just like, it's just cool to walk away with this episode I feel like did not follow any kind of cookie cutter
No,
thing.
not at all.
But man, I landed and like just feeling like that same if we add an episode, we feel full.
And
I feel
here's what's
full.
crazy is I love talking about things like this, and I also love talking about things like this at the very end of an episode, because like you have to be a certain person to listen to this all the way through. And so I like talking to those people. What's up, Joan?
Hi, Mom.
Okay, but like I think what's really interesting is I adore and love and seek like comments and almost criticism to things that we talk about and are talking about. And I think like I can think of people right now who would listen to this and be like, that's not what a man is, right?
Come on.
And I would love that.
Yeah.
And I would love to talk to you, by the way, out there. And I'm trying to think of like, I'm also very, very excited for, while this episode, we didn't talk a lot about women and femininity.
Femininity.
Is that a word?
Femininity.
Femininity.
Feminilabilities.
I can't say.
Anemone.
An anemone. That's where a clownfish lives. What was I saying? We didn't talk a lot about that.
Yeah.
But I'm also very interested for the women who do listen to this.
Yeah.
If they're like, I would love that in a man, or I do love that in a man. Like that's what I'm looking for in a man.
Yeah.
Not what the internet says is what all females love and adore.
Yeah. And I think it's important to remember that like our goal in this is not for us to have the final say
Correct.
in any of these topics, but it's actually to pose questions, have conversations together, and then like join the community, join the conversation, be a part of the dialogue.
Email us.
Reach
out to us.
Comment.
Yes.
What's the email?
podcast@kingdomempower.com.
Yeah. Like, I would like, how do you respond to this stuff?
I don't know.
Because like not you specifically, like our listeners, our listener.
Right.
Yeah.
Even though I'm one of the only two people in the room. You're not talking to me.
No.
You're talking to people.
Well, I was
through
kind of
the
going back and forth. I was
imaginal
doing when I was
digital
breaking. Yeah. Yeah.
screens. Right. I love that for you.
Thanks.
I love that for you.
Well, I've noticed you've been doing some, so I thought I'd throw a little,
Right. I'm trying
little
to
action
right.
that way.
Trying to do it.
Yeah.
No, I think it's been really good. I think. I don't know, man. Love you, man.
I love you too.
I do have a question before we, and I have some answers, but I'd love to know your thoughts first. Say that I'm a man listening to this episode and I'm identifying myself with some of the problems that you're identifying.
Yes.
Yeah.
I want to correct these. What are 3 action items I can take out of this episode and apply that will help me move towards more of a healthy masculinity?
First thing that I would say is when you are confronted with a situation or information, which whatever you haven't acknowledged, like what you think your unhealthy trait is, but when that thing faces you for the first time, I would say a good step would be to pause, breathe, and not just say the first thing that comes out of your mind.
Yeah.
Like just give a moment in those, like before you feel like you're going to jump right into your negative trait.
Yeah. I would say something that you should do that kind of goes back along with this and kind of what we've been talking about of seeking God first, of go do some research on the inner lines, on the Googles of ownership versus stewardship, and start treating your life like you're a steward of it, not an owner of it. And treat the things around you as you are a steward of them, not an owner of them. And I think that when you take that principle, that idea, and start applying it to broader situations, it's going to allow you to do kind of what you were talking about, but give you this kind of background in it.
Yeah. And the third thing I would throw out there is like be in a relationship with somebody that can mentor you.
Yes.
Somebody that you look up to and is an example of what healthy masculinity looks like.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to model the trash.
Yeah.
Find somebody that's going to challenge you and show you what that positive relationship or masculinity actually looks like.
Yeah. I would actually add something to that, by the way. Along with, like, you said, I believe, yes, it was the drain from my garage. It's fine. I think you just said find someone to be an example
Mm-hmm.
of this in your life.
Hmm.
Is that what you just said?
Yeah, basically find like
Right.
somebody that can mentor or models those
Right.
healthy behaviors.
So I think that's great, and I do think you should do that. But here's something else that I would encourage you to do that I think really opens up a whole nother set of doors is find somebody else who is not a mentor necessarily, but that you can do life with.
yeah,
That you're going through some of the same situations and you can bounce off of each other. And sometimes it's one of you helping the other one, and sometimes it's the other one helping the other one. But you can learn from each other. I feel like a lot of times when we look at like mentors and like a mentee relationship, like that kind of stuff is only one way.
like a sensei,
Right. Like a sensei.
Mr. Miyagi.
But find someone in your life where it goes back and forth that you can truly, honestly, 100% be vulnerable
Yeah,
with.
yeah,
And you can be vulnerable with each other, because I feel like that changes the whole dynamic and changes also kind of what you take away from it. Is
Yeah,
it's not just you
better.
being vulnerable
That's
with
good.
one person and then them giving you advice or whatever it
Yeah.
is. It's going back and forth, and that can really, really
have a
change
healthy
things.
relationship with somebody that is like like-minded and pursuing the same thing.
Correct.
That's good.